some subset of consumers are using churn as a budget management tool. Is that churn is going from a decision you make when you're tired of a service or you no longer want it, to a decision you make that is temporary. You're just using that to manage your monthly video budget.
Hi everyone, for today's episode of Retention Zone, the video podcast focused on streaming monetization, I have the pleasure to have with me Doug Shapiro. If we focus on streaming, how would you tell the state of the nation in streaming if you meet someone that has been asleep for the last 10 years? How would you summarize that?
Last 10 years, huh? Well, I think that if you kind of go back, what happened in the video business is really a textbook case of low-end disruption, right? So if you go back and look at the video business historically, pay TV was a great business. The cable networks generated amongst the best margins in all of the economy. They had very low capital intensity. So they were over-earning in a sense. They were over-serving consumers with too many networks. You would see this Nielsen data that the average household was only watching 7 or 8% of the networks they paid for every month. And then the prices were going up too fast. And every time you'd see these reports come out from the FCC about the rate of cable increases compared to the CPI, and cable prices were increasing a lot faster. So you had an industry that really was ripe for disruption, over-earning, overcharging, over-serving consumers. And then what happened was the internet unbundled information from infrastructure. They lowered the barriers to entry to distribute content. Netflix came in, and Netflix basically played the whole disruption playbook. When they came out,
Yep.
They had a crappy kind of low-end product. They gave it away for free. If you were a subscriber to the DVD by mail service, you got streaming for free initially. And it was a bit of a joke. It was like old TV shows, some old movies. Everyone kind of ignored it. And then in 2009, they did the Stars deal, which was pretty amazing because they got pay one window rights on Sony and on Disney. They got 2,500 movies, and all of a sudden they're on a path to just keep getting better and better. And then eventually they introduced original programming with House of Cards, or I guess it was technically Lilyhammer, which was the first show. And then that got better and better and better and better. And so, it was this, like I said, classic disruption where they started at the bottom, kept getting better. And then the incumbents initially kind of ignored it, were kind of glib and dismissive. And then by the time they realized, then they went from glib and dismissive to sort of in denial. And then they eventually got to this point where they said, hey, oh my gosh, we have to do something too. And so what they all did was they pursued the Netflix model with great vigor, right? Disney Plus and Max and Peacock, Paramount Plus, all of the big media companies launched their own streaming services. You could argue they had overly aggressive pricing. I mean, the way that I put it, and then there was this kind of awakening that happened, I guess really toward the beginning of I guess it was last year. Right?
The beginning of 2022. I think it's the beginning, spring of 22.
Yeah, that's right. So, and there was this big awakening where everyone's like, basically Netflix dug a hole and everybody jumped into a hole. And then in the spring of 22, like, wait a second, they looked up like, we're in a hole. It's like, yeah, well, you jumped in a hole. And when you jump in a hole, you end up in a hole. Like, that's how it works. And then, so, I think in the defense of the big media companies at the time, they were being told by Wall Street, you need to grow subs, you need to drive subs. And so, they pursued this very aggressive model. They shifted resources over from the highly lucrative traditional TV business into the far less lucrative streaming business. And actually in October of 20, I wrote a piece. One of the first pieces I published was called One Clear Casualty of the Streaming Wars, Profit. And it was making the point that just the profit
Absolutely.
pool in streaming was structurally smaller than the profit pool in traditional TV. And so it was a little bit of a caution to say, be careful what you wish for, because if you're running from a very lucrative thing to a much less lucrative thing. And so what has happened since then, it's starting really in the beginning of 22, was the realization that I think two things. One is that the TAM, the market size, is smaller than they thought.
Total addressable market.
Yes, the total addressable market is
Wall Street veterans.
Yeah. So that the total addressable market is smaller than they thought. And also that the unit economics are worse than they thought. And the unit economics are worse than they thought, largely because the churn is so high.
Yeah. And what is the reason for I'm sure there are 10,000 reasons, but how do you analyze churn? What are the reasons for churn, and what is the solution that the streaming companies are putting in place in this phase?
Well, I think the simplest answer is that the consumer switching costs are so much lower, right? In traditional TV, if you wanted to cancel service, that was a hard thing to do. You had to make a phone call, and someone had to roll a truck, and you had to be home from 8 to noon, and some guy was going to walk on your carpet and get dirt on it. And, it was a huge pain to cancel. And now canceling is, 2 clicks, right? So I think that's one element of it. It's just much lower consumer switching costs. The other thing that I think we're starting to see is that consumers are starting to become, some subset of consumers are using churn as a budget management tool. Is that churn is going from a decision you make when you're tired of a service, or you no longer want it, to a decision you make that is temporary. You're just using that to manage your monthly video budget. So you have this concept, Antenna, which is probably the preeminent provider of streaming or churn data, consumer churn data in the United States. They have a term called serial churners, and these are people who are churning on and off. I think their definition is people who have canceled 3 or more services in the last 2 years, something like that. But in any case, one of the other stats that they have is a resubscribe rate. So what proportion of the gross ads in any given month are people who had disconnected within the last 12 months? And for the big platforms like a Netflix or Disney, something like 30, 40 or more % of the gross ads in any given month are people who disconnected within the last year. So that's another thing you're seeing, is that people are a pretty significant proportion of the subscriber base is using churn to manage their spend.
Almost churn as a way of life. Sorry, don't want to make it too big.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's becoming it's proactive churn, right? It's budget management through proactive churn.
And in terms of the fact that now everybody's almost is going hybrid, combining AVOD and SVOD in a certain way. Someone has TVOD. So do you think this is like a way of manage the funnel in a better way, even in this case of people leaving and coming back? So you don't lose them completely. They're there. They may watch something free. What do you think? It's a good choice, or?
Well, I don't think we're really seeing what you described. You're not really seeing a combination of paid and free services. What you are seeing is a hybridization of paid and ad supported and premium paid and not ad supported, right? So meaning, like, if you look at as an example, if you look at Paramount, they have Pluto and they have Paramount Plus. There's no relationship between those services. So they're not using Pluto as top of funnel to drive people to Paramount Plus. But what you are seeing is that all of the streaming services have introduced, so historically, Netflix was ad free, and then Hulu was ad supported, and then Hulu was the first one that offered a premium ad free tier, which was years ago. And then when Max came out, it initially had no ads, and then it offered ads. Anyway, you can kind of go one by one. A slightly different path, but now we're at the point where all of them have both a premium ad-free tier and a paid ad-supported tier.
It's becoming like the standard now. Can you say
that?
I
think it's really the idea of a dual revenue stream model is very old, right? That was the big innovation of cable TV, is they took broadcast from a free ad-supported thing to a dual revenue stream business with both affiliate fees and advertising. And so, going back to the point I was making earlier about everybody jumping into a hole, it's like now they're all trying to dig out. And so the way they're digging out is they're raising prices and they're introducing ad tiers, amongst other things.
And do you think, it seems Netflix is kind of the real current winner of this whole thing in terms of, the numbers, do you think it's a temporary, phase, or there's something in Netflix that they are able to operate the company, in a way that is sustainable?
No, it's certainly, I wouldn't say it's temporary. I think it's been I agree they're in a superior position. I think it's through a very deliberate set of practices over a very long time. I don't know that I think that they, as I said before, they played the disruption playbook to a T, right? That they came in from the bottom. They knew that the big incumbents would be calcified and unable to respond. And they just, got better and better and better and kept on obtaining more scale. And, at this point they are, they're the Coca-Cola of streaming or whatever. Like they're the closest you have to a utility. If you are a streaming household, the odds are that you consider Netflix to be a must-have. And so that's one of the things that shows up in the antenna churn data, is that average churn for all this premium SVOD services just has been going up for years. Netflix's churn is off the charts low, right? It is way below everybody else's, because it has a sufficient critical mass of content. And I think, partially this sort of brand association that Netflix equals streaming, that people are just not nearly as active canceling and resubscribing.
Okay. So thank you, Doug, for the deep picture you took, and my assignment of telling the story of someone that was living for 10 years, I think was a success. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carlo.